Thank you. Senator Paul, income inequality has been rising in the United States. 50 years ago, for example, the average CEO of a big corporation in this country earned 20 times the average salary of one of his or her workers. Today, that CEO earns about 300 times the average salary of a worker. Does it matter at all that the gap between the rich and everyone else is widening?
Absolutely, and I think that we ought to look where income inequality seems to be the worst. It seems to be worst in cities run by Democrats, governors of states run by Democrats, and countries currently run by Democrats. So the thing is, let's look for root causes. But I would also lay some blame at the feet of the Federal Reserve. I think the Federal Reserve has made this problem worse. By artificially keeping interest rates below the market rate, average ordinary citizens have a tough time earning interest, have a tough time making money. They're actually talking now about negative interest. The money as it's created through quantitative easing or other means tends to start out in the big banks in New York. And because we're now paying interest for them to keep the money there, much of that money has not filtered out into the economy. So what we're finding is there is increasing income disparity and income inequality. We also find that as the Federal Reserve destroys the value of the currency, what you're finding is that if you're poor, if you make $20,000 a year and you have 3 or 4 kids and you're trying to get by, as your prices rise, or as the value of the dollar shrinks, these are the people that are hurt the worst. So really we need to re-examine whether we want a Federal Reserve that's involved so much in determining interest rates. We also need to look at root causes as to what caused the housing boom and the housing collapse. But the bottom line is, if you want less income inequality, move to a city with a Republican mayor or a state with a Republican governor.
Thank you, sir.
All right, we're only just getting...
Thank you very much. Senator Paul, you said you want to blow up the tax code and start over with an across-the-board 14.5% fair and flat tax. You happily offer that it is not revenue neutral, and that's the idea. You want to choke off the amount of money coming into Washington. But don't you risk creating a near-term budget crisis, just as your presidency would be beginning?
Well, it's a great question, Neil, and thanks for including me in the tax debate. I think what's important about the tax debate is that we have to ask the question, where is money best spent? In the private sector and the government sector. I want a government really, really small, so small you can barely see it. So I want lower taxes and much more money in the private sector. My tax plan, however, is the only tax plan among any of the candidates on the stage that is part of a balanced budget plan. I put forward 3 plans that actually balance the budget over a 5-year period. Each of these plans have details on exactly where we'd cut. The question came up earlier, where would you cut? Nobody likes to say where they would cut. I've put pencil to paper and done 3 budgets that actually balance. I'm also in favor of a plan called the penny plan, where we'd just cut 1% across the board, and that budget actually balances in less than 5 years. So I think what's extraordinary about my tax plan is it is in the context of balancing the budget. What's also extraordinary about my tax plan is it gets rid of the payroll tax. Democrats demagogue this issue to death, and when they do, they say, oh, a millionaire would get a bigger tax cut than someone making $10,000. That's proportionality, as Ben's trying to explain to folks. But the thing is if we get rid of the payroll tax, everybody's going to get a tax cut. And this is something that I think the public at large will support and could win an election.
There are no deductions under your plan?
Ours is 14.5% for corporations, 14.5% for individuals, no payroll tax for the employee, the business tax pays for Social Security, and there would be 2 remaining deductions, home mortgage and charity.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. A point that I'd like to make about the tax credits, we have to decide what is conservative and what isn't conservative. Is it fiscally conservative to have $1 trillion expenditure? We're not talking about giving people back their tax money. He's talking about giving people money they didn't pay. It's a welfare transfer payment. So here's what we have. Is it conservative to have $1 trillion in transfer payments, a new welfare program that's a refundable tax credit? Add that to Marco's plan for $1 trillion in new military spending, and you get something that looks to me not very conservative.
Thank you. Governor Casey.
No, I'm
Let me come
sorry.
to Governor Casey.
No,
Governor
excuse
Casey.
me, excuse me, I get to respond.
Very quickly, Senator.
No, I get my 60 seconds to respond. He's talking about my tax plan.
Please.
So let me begin with this. I actually believe, first of all, this is their money. They do pay. It is refundable, not just against the taxes they pay to the government, but also on their federal income tax. It's refundable against the payroll tax. Everyone pays payroll tax. This is their money. This is not our money. And here's what I don't understand. If you invest that money in a piece of equipment, if you invest that money in a business, you get to write it off your taxes. But if you invest it in your children, in the future of America, in strengthening your family, we're not going to recognize that in our tax code. The family is the most important institution in
Nevertheless,
society.
it's not
and yes,
very
I do want to rebuild the
conservative,
American
Marco.
military.
How's it conservative?
I know that Rand is a committed isolationist. I'm not. I believe the world is a stronger and a better place when the United States is the strongest military power in the world.
Marco, how is it conservative? How is it conservative to add $1 trillion expenditure for the federal government that you're not paying for? How is it conservative? How is it conservative to add $1 trillion in military expenditures? You cannot be a conservative if you're going to keep promoting new programs that you're not going to pay for.
I may respond more quickly.
Very quickly, Senator.
We can't even have an economy if we're not safe. There are radical jihadists in the Middle East beheading people and crucifying Christians. A radical Shia cleric in Iran trying to get a nuclear weapon. The Chinese taking over the South China Sea. Yes, I believe the world is a safer... No, I don't believe. I know that the world is a safer and better place when America is the strongest military power in the world.
Marco, I don't think we're any safer. I do not think we are any safer from bankruptcy court. As we go further and further into debt, we become less and less safe. This is the most important thing we're going to talk about tonight. Can you be a conservative and be liberal on military spending? Can you be for unlimited military spending and say, oh, I'm going to make the country safe? No, we need a safe country. But you know, we spend more on our military than the next 10 countries combined. I want a strong national defense, but I don't want us to be bankrupt.
Well, and there is a middle ground. There is a middle ground.
To this country.
Hey, Gerard, you know, we might want to point out China's not part of this deal.
Yeah. True. It's true. Yeah.
That's right.
Before we get a little bit off kilter
Isn't that part of the problem, if I may say, Senator, that if this deal is not ratified by the US, by the Senate, then it would actually give China an opportunity to grow its economic leadership, which it's been seeking to do. And if the US is unable to take part in this trade deal with these countries in Asia, China will take the lead.
There is an argument that China doesn't like the deal because in us doing the deal, we'll be trading with their competitors. You're exactly right. But I think we've sort of missed the point a little bit here. There is an important point, though, about how we discuss these trade treaties that I do agree with Mr. Trump on. We should negotiate from a position of strength, and we also should negotiate using the full force and the constitutional power that was given to us. I think it's a mistake that we give up power to the presidency on these trade deals. We give up the power to filibuster, and I'm kind of fond of that power. We give up the power to amend. And I think really one of the big problems we have in our country is over the last century, really, so much power has gravitated to the executive branch. Really, Congress is kind of a bystander. We don't write the rules. We don't make the laws. The executive branch does. So even in trade, and I am for trade, I think we should be careful about giving so much power to the presidency.
Thank you. Thanks, Senator.
Senator Paul. Now, Senator Paul, you have already said, sir, that would be a mistake in not talking to Vladimir Putin in order to rule it out. You've argued that it's never a good idea to close down communication. With that in mind, do you think the same applies to administration efforts right now to include the Iranians in talks on Syria?
I'd like first to respond to the accusation. I think it's particularly naive and particularly foolish to think that we're not going to talk to Russia. The idea of a no-fly zone, realize that this is also something Hillary Clinton agrees with several on our side with. You're asking for a no-fly zone in an area in which Russia already flies. Russia flies in that zone at the invitation of Iraq. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but you better know at least what we're getting into. So when you think it's going to be a good idea to have a no-fly zone over Iraq, realize that means you are saying we are going to shoot down Russian planes. If you're ready for that, be ready to send your sons and daughters to another war in Iraq. I don't want to see that happen. I think the first war in Iraq was a mistake. You can be strong without being involved in every civil war around the world.
And how would you respond?
Ronald Reagan was strong, but Ronald Reagan didn't send
Ronald
troops
Reagan
into
walked
the Middle
away at
East.
Reykjavik. He walked away. He quit talking when it was time to quit
Can I finish
talking.
with my
Why
time?
does she keep interrupting everybody?
Yeah.
Boy, terrible.
Yeah, I'd like to finish my response, basically.
And, if I may respond.
This is an important
you know,
question. This is an incredibly important question. And the question goes to be, who do we want to be our commander-in-chief? Do you want a commander-in-chief who says something that we never did throughout the entire Cold War, to discontinue having conversations with the Russians? I'm not happy about them flying over there, but I'm not naive enough to say, well, Iraq has them flying over their airspace. We're just going to announce that we're shooting them down. That is naive to the point of being something you might hear in junior high, but it's scary.
But if you're not going to respond in a no-fly zone strategy, what would yours be?
The first thing I would do is I wouldn't arm our enemies. I wouldn't arm ISIS. Most of the people who want the no-fly zone also favored arming the allies of al-Qaeda, which became ISIS. That was the dumbest, most foolhardy notion, and most of the people up here supported it. They wanted to arm the allies of al-Qaeda. Some of them still do. That's how ISIS grew. We pushed back Assad, and ISIS was allowed to grow in the vacuum. So the first thing you do is don't arm your enemies.
Well, I might just say it.
Senator Paul, you were one of 15 Republicans to vote for an amendment which states that human activity contributed to climate change. President Obama has announced an aggressive plan to cut carbon emissions. At the same time, energy production in America has boomed. Is it possible to continue this boom and move toward energy self-sufficiency while at the same time pursuing a meaningful climate change program?
The first thing I would do as president is repeal the regulations that are hampering our energy that the president has put in place, including the Clean Power Act. While I do think man may have a role in our climate, I think nature also has a role. The planet's 4.5 billion years old. We've been through geologic age after geologic age. We've had times when the temperature's been warmer. We've had times when the temperature's been colder. We've had times when the carbon in the atmosphere has been higher. So I think we need to look before we leap. President's often fond of saying he wants a balanced solution. But really, we do need to balance both keeping the environment clean. We will have some rules for that. But we got to balance that with the economy. He's devastated my state. I say the president's not only destroying Kentucky, he's destroying the Democrat Party down there because nobody wants to associate with him. So what we really need is somebody that understands that we do need energy of all forms. And that means we will have solar and wind and hydro, but we will still have coal and we still will have natural gas. And we've got to have an all-of-the-above policy. But it would be a mistake to shut down all of our industries in the coal fields and shut down the coal-powered plants. If we did so, we're going to have a day where we wake up and some of our big cities are either very cold or very hot. So I think it's a big danger and we shouldn't do it. And what we should do is say we want all of the above. We want to free up the energy sector and let people produce, let them drill, let them explore.
Thank you, sir.
And Senator Paul, we will begin with you.
We're the richest, freest, most humanitarian nation in the history of mankind. But we also borrow $1 million a minute. And the question I have for all Americans is think about it. Can you be a fiscal conservative if you don't conserve all of the money? If you're a profligate spender and you spend money in an unlimited fashion for the military, is that a conservative notion? We have to be conservative with all spending, domestic spending and welfare spending. I'm the only fiscal conservative on the stage.
Thank you, Senator. Governor Casey.